So I'm here to basically just express some reflections, and it's really difficult to know where to start or where to end, because we seem to be in some kind of reality hellhole from which it's difficult to to find a beginning or an end. It just seems to be just a continuum of such unspeakable evil and complicity with that evil. So I'm just going to kind of like just improvise and go with where my mind takes me. So I think it's clear, though, that for all of us who really care, that language is not working anymore. I know they wrote about that after the Holocaust as well. Philosophers wrote about how it was no longer possible to write poetry, for instance, and such like. And but it's not just poetry. It doesn't seem possible to use language in a way that has any meaning anymore. How do you express such transgression from everything that we thought of as normal, or at least falling within the norms of morality and of decency and human behaviour? And there's this disconnect, of course, between the people, or let's call them the masses or whatever, but let's call them the people, and our leaders, who, for some unknown and absurd reason, we still seem to, I don't, but most seem to still believe that we live in some kind of democracy where these leaders of ours actually represent us. But of course they don't. I mean, we see them today as an elite that are driven by their own interests that have been, that they've been bought by, but by the powers who are able to do that. In this case, of course, it's so much to do with the Zionist lobby or the Israel lobby that are directing behaviours throughout the world. I mean, everyone is too scared to utter a phrase, a word even, that might bring the wrath upon them. And so they're quiet. Or in the background, they're completely complicit, of course, in terms of supplying arms and funding, and allowing the narrative to continue with the mantras such like Israel has a right to defend itself. I mean, it's still being used by all of the Western leaders. What does that mean? What does that mean, to defend yourself? How can someone committing the crimes have the right to defend themselves? Against what? And of course, the advocates of such of such opinions will then say, of what happened on the 7th of October. And yes, it was terrible, 7th of October. We all know that terrible things happened, but not in a vacuum, which is how it's presented, of course. As a reaction to the evil that is sustained, that has been there, the evil of occupation, the evil of oppression, the evil of imprisonment without trial, the evil of ethnic cleansing, the evil of the evil of having their homes destroyed and their lands destroyed with impunity. The evil of living in the world's largest concentration camp. The evil of having your calories basically rationed on the outside, so that you can just and your water and also rationed, so that basically you're not really living, you're just subsisting. And when you do dare to protest in a peaceful way, as happened a few years back with those that went to the Gaza border, citizens without arms protesting their imprisonment and raising a banner to the world that they're being denied the right to go back to their homelands. So just shot off one by snipers, or cruelly crippled on purpose. Even protesters in wheelchairs shot, nurses shot, journalists, of course, shot. So this was all well before the 7th of October, as we all know. I mean, why do we even have to go there? Because well, we're forced to, because the adage is played on a loop. But we all know how risible that is. That however awful the events of the 7th of October, they were a reaction. They weren't the event in itself. And what Israel has become, I mean, it's been like this for so long, but many perhaps on the outside were not aware of that until now. But yeah, what Israel has become is this anathema to everything that we once held dear in terms of our values, in terms of what a moral compass actually means. I mean, again, I can't find words. There are no words to describe it. I mean, you know, it's beyond barbaric. It's beyond. I mean, is that what happens when you're given free rein to a view of being a super race, the Übermensch? I mean, I know it's so easy to make comparisons with the past and with the Nazis and Nazism and how the Nazis behaved towards the Jews, the Gypsies, the homosexuals, and others, in terms of exterminating them, but I just don't feel that even those comparisons are necessary, because we have the monstrosity before us in and of itself so potent, so overwhelming, and so unreined, acting with absolute impunity, because all of the Western powers are basically going out of their way not to dare say a word that could, God forbid, that could be interpreted as an unwanted critique, as an offence. And they're all just playing the game. And where does that leave us? Where does that leave us who still have a moral compass? Just we just feel abandoned. It's like we're living inside a life that doesn't really represent us. And our voices, because we cry out all the time, we won't be quiet. But we know at the same time that our voices are falling on deaf ears. It's like we're crying out into this wilderness, into this abyss of complete transmutation of all values that we didn't used to question because they were so evident. And they are evident to us, but so, and some of us have sacrificed a lot to remain where we are. Not that we feel we have a choice, because to do otherwise would be, we might as well just open our veins and otherwise and just bleed out onto an earth that is already drowning from the amount of blood that it's absorbed. So we have no choice. And yet, we know at the same time that we're crying out into the abyss. And yeah, I was saying that some of us have sacrificed a lot, and that doesn't mean that we are looking for any kind of praise or anything like that, because, as I said, we can't do otherwise. But, I mean, you know, just the other day, or no, it was a few weeks ago, several weeks ago now, perhaps, my mother made it clear to me, the last member of my immediate family, that she wanted nothing more to do with me. And that's after that was after basically being the only one of my father had stopped having any communication with me right at the very beginning of this genocide because of me speaking out against it. And then my sister, my aunt had stopped speaking to me years ago because of my critique of Israel. Someone who I grew up with as my basically almost a substitute mother, really. But and now my mother, and it's not that I suppose it's beyond being. I'm not upset because I'm just, I don't know what the word is. I suppose it's a frustration to see the human spirit as being so weak that they just can't question, that they just feel obliged to have to accept the narrative of the day, because if they didn't, in my case, it's coming from a Jewish background, so it means that, as Jews, if they didn't accept everything that Israel does as being unquestioned, then they somehow are less Jewish, which we know is completely the opposite, because Judaism, I think, like all religions, represents morality within it, and the morality of the of so much of the Western world comes out of the original tenets from the Jewish scriptures, and that's what's being transmuted. That's what's being completely and perversely destroyed. So, and yet they remain with this steadfast belief that somehow Zionism and Judaism are unquestionably linked and need to be equated. I suppose a shimmer of light at the end of this tunnel, even though, as I said at the beginning, it's difficult to see any end here, but is that the younger generation are changing. We see that with the Jews in America, Jewish Voice for Peace, and If Not Now, and others, and other organisations. We see their activism. How the students that stood up at the universities in America, so many of them were Jewish and supporting their Palestinian and Arab brethren, as one, as it should be, as one entity. I mean, all this we and they and we and them and us and them. It's so. That's what's perverse. Humanity is what should be linking us. And yet today, in the Trump era, which I'm not saying the Biden era was any joy. I mean, we know how complicit Biden was in this genocide, and that without him it wouldn't have come into being, really. But now in the Trump era, it's you have the tyrannical authoritarian element that isn't come into play as an extra, if you like, as an extra player here, and it's formidable. The way universities are being threatened to have all their funding removed if they don't start giving lists of students who were involved in the peaceful demonstrations against the genocide and for Palestinian rights, so that they can be expelled or deported or both. And also the demands being made on these universities to fire lecturers and to restructure their courses so that they're pro-Israel and that they don't represent diversity anymore or anything. So, I mean, this is our world today. I mean, and we still believe that we kind of exist in some kind of democracy. I mean, look towards countries like China, whatever, as being some, as being these regimes that need to be opposed because they aren't democratic. But could we go any further from some kind of tyranny than where the West is now? Where was it? Just in the UK, just the other day, a group of Quakers, one of the most peaceful and just forms of Christianity, were having a tea party, and because they were expressing views in defence of Palestine and critical of the genocide, and also their views for climate against the travesty that's being committed on the planet. So the Quakers were their place of residence was brutally broken into by the police, and the Quakers were arrested. I mean, where are we living? What is this world that we've created for ourselves? And we all feel so powerless before it. I mean, there must be some way that some kind of paradigm shift can be envisaged, because it's unsustainable to continue in this way. I mean, we all feel powerless. We all just cry out on Facebook or other platforms of social media and feel that's all we can do, when actually our voices are mostly resonating amongst ourselves. I'm not saying we should stop. I mean, that gives us a sense of solidarity perhaps amongst ourselves and a feeling of not being totally alone and isolated, and also the hope that perhaps one or two people from the outside will see our posts and open their eyes just a little to the reality as it is, and not how it's portrayed in a media that is totally appropriated by a system that is corrupt and in the hands of the elite. But there must be a way that we can break out of this paradigm. I don't know, I don't have the answers, but it can't go on like this. It just can't. Every day, just seeing dozens and dozens of children burnt to cinders, their heads blown off, the parts of their bodies just no longer present on a flailing corpse, or even worse, still alive, screaming out in terror and in pain as the blood flows freely into an already drenched ground. I mean, how can the earth, it's so saturated with children's blood, how can it take any more? And for those of us who believe that the earth is also something, is also part of nature and has an existence or some kind of being, just as we do. I mean, how can that existence, how can that being just soak up so much blood, so much cries of horror and pain and brutality? And continue also to survive. I mean, it's like we're damning everything. Or we, I mean, it's not us who are crying out against this, but we as if you think of man as, I mean, how can it not learn? How can it not change? And for those, we have to cry out, but what of those who don't want to open their eyes? And what of those who keep repeating the same mantra, or who just think that the information they're receiving on the media networks like BBC and such like are what is telling them the truth? A friend of mine who I have difficulty at the moment of being close to because of her blindness to Zionism and her refusal to really open her eyes to what Israel truly represents. I just want to read something out. I said, I just wrote to her. I wrote to her something because I wanted to try to jolt her, because, you know, I like this person and I just wanted to try to dislodge that kind of barrier that's put between us because of this dogmatism of hers. Again, it's like someone who, because they're a Zionist, they have to remain a Zionist and they have to remain faithful to Israel at all costs. So I wrote to her, I said, I'm so disturbed by the massacres that Israel is perpetrating. Children and families are being targeted and blown to pieces and burnt to smithereens in their tents daily. Others are simply starving to death. It is just too upsetting for words. How you can continue to support a state with its supremacist doctrine that is committing such a Holocaust in front of our eyes, one of the greatest injustices of our lifetime, I'll never understand. And her reply was, translating from French, Howard, the Gazans have to release themselves from the yoke of Hamas. If they do so, then the Gazans will receive all the necessary aids to construct a Palestinian state, an autonomous state, an autonomous and secure Palestinian state. The ball's in their hands. You cannot do that in their place. Neither I nor you. I'm convinced that they're going to achieve that. The movement of revolt against Hamas has already begun. I mean, how do you reply to something like that? I mean, that it's just so conveniently just think that this whole genocide is actually in some sense, not in some sense, in every sense, from those words, the fault of the Palestinians because they have supported Hamas, or they won't let go of Hamas. I mean, there's so much that one could begin to unravel from that, but it's so absurd. I mean, where do you begin? You know, I suppose an easier way to deal with it would be to actually look for an analogy. I mean, I know it's absurd to even try to answer something like that, but you still have to. And I mean, I did actually reply, and I said something like, I sent some photos, some very disturbing photos of children, and but I won't read everything I said. I just, but what comes to mind now is, let's think of the IRA, for instance, when they were in the phase of their attacks against the British establishment for the occupation of Northern Ireland. You know, what would an equivalent response be to what Israel is doing? It would be England saying, the IRA, we know that they are housed in Belfast. They have their headquarters in different buildings in around Belfast. So then they would accuse the IRA of using all the citizens of Northern Ireland as human shields because they were hiding amongst them. This is I'm just making an analogy to how it's being sold by Israel. And then they would say, well, then we are justified in basically destroying every single building in Belfast with the assumption that the IRA are hiding in some of those buildings. We don't exactly know where. We think that they might be in some housing estates here and some housing estates there, and maybe in some high-rise buildings that they might have an apartment in one of the buildings. Maybe their children go to the schools that are being and maybe they go and collect their children from the schools. So the schools are also targets. And what about the churches? The IRA. What about the Catholics going to church and using the priests as some kind of intermediaries? Churches will be targets as well. So just imagine the British going into Northern Ireland and absolutely dropping the equivalent of 6 Hiroshima bombs on Belfast. And not only that, but justifying it, because they know that the IRA are housed somewhere there, and we can justify it because many people in Northern Ireland, the Catholics there, they support the IRA. So we'll destroy Belfast, or we'll destroy the Catholic parts of Belfast at least, all of them. Just raze the whole thing to the ground. And you would have the rest of the world, all of the European powers, America, Canada, Australia, everyone basically rallying round the UK and saying, Britain has a right to defend itself. I think when you open that out and look at it in the light of an imagined but nevertheless very comparable scenario, perhaps for those who are just so blinded by the way this narrative has been sold and packaged, perhaps then you can just see how utterly heinous and unacceptable and unspeakable such actions are, such crimes are. I mean, I feel stupid even making such an analogy, because when you look at the analogy of it happening in another context, it just appears so utterly absurd, because just so far removed from anything that could even be deemed even slightly acceptable. And yet, when Israel's doing it, it's not questioned by the world, by the powers, by anyone, except our voices, which are, the common people. Yeah. It's just so sad. I don't know how people will look back at this in history at another time, if our world even exists by then. And how will this be judged? How will we be able to even fathom how this was possible? There's a lot more that I'd like to say, but I don't really have any structure to this. I just wanted to just express myself, and I'll do so from time to time. I will try. I have a lot of brain fog from my Lyme disease, and so I never can really plan it properly in advance. But it doesn't matter. I just think that we need to express ourselves. We need our voices to be heard. And as I wrote to someone else today, that even if we acknowledge how powerless we are and how little effect our voices are going to have, that's no reason not to speak out. Because if we just throw up our arms and we're silent with the thought that, well, we can't affect any change, so what's the point? That's when we've truly failed, and that's when they have truly won. Because then the very concept of universal values of morality is just absolutely dead. It's buried. It no longer resonates in the world. It no longer has a voice. So we will continue to speak out.